Hi. First, I'll give you guys a little background about us. We got started because we went out to VR LA, a big conference for virtual reality in Los Angeles, and there was a lot of software and technology companies there building hardware, making software. When we were testing out the headsets and trying everything out, we noticed that there was sort of lacking of great content or people trying to tell any narrative. So we thought there was a little bit of a void there, and then we could fill that and try and produce some great content. So from that point, we ended up starting our own production company, and I'll let Tripp talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we knew we wanted to get into VR content, so we took out a $10,000 loan and built one of these little cameras, just the Freedom 360 GoPro rig, and shot a 1-minute video and turned it into this Samsung VR contest, and we ended up winning and paying the loan back, and then sort of just been in business for like 4 months following that. So I'll let Jenna talk.
So today what we're going to speak about is our low budget 360, our experience and how we made our project from start to finish, because we learned so much. It was such a huge learning curve, and we would love to share it with you guys so that you can learn from us.
Oh, and we encourage you to interrupt us with any questions, like at any time.
Yeah, so Tripp's going to start with the pitch and like how you manage expectations going from there.
Yeah, so one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times if you are pitching VR work, your client may not know much about the VR workflow. I think a lot of people are somewhat familiar with the film workflow, but VR can be totally different. So I think the first thing to take from it is that VR isn't film, totally. So they are kind of two different mediums. One perfect example of that is in film, one of the best shots is the close-up shot. You have your close-up that really helps you get close in and intimate with your actress. But in VR, it tends to, if you have this camera up close to somebody and you're filming them in VR, then you put on the goggles and watch it, you feel like you're just kind of hovering next to their face, and it's not the same feeling. So that's just kind of one thing that sort of shows how it is kind of a different medium to tackle. So with expectations with what you're pitching, you don't really want to promise the world before you've gotten into working the workflow, because it can be a little misleading as to a totally different medium than promising for film.
And another expectation that you should think about is the timeline of how the workflow in 360 works. I know that we had it, that we were, you just have to educate your client and yourself and to see how long things actually take, because it does take a little longer than expected, and it's just good for everyone to know before going into it exactly how long you would expect things to take and your timelines, and to make sure that you schedule appropriately.
Also, there's a big part in educating the client. As far as the deliverables, normally when you're doing a video, you can throw it up on YouTube, Vimeo pretty easily. When you watch VR videos on platforms that support them now, it's very compressed. So if you watch like a YouTube streaming VR video, you'll notice that a lot of them are really grainy. It sort of doesn't do it justice, especially if you're looking at it in like a Google Cardboard or something like that. So you have to, going into it, educate them on how it's going to be delivered, how they're going to view it. If people are going to be watching it locally on a device or streaming, and figure out what's the best strategy going forward for you. Which it's great that like Facebook and YouTube are trying to stream it. We're just hoping that the quality is going to get better, and they'll add more features such as being able to maybe pre-download the video ahead of time so that you can have it in a higher quality.
And another quick thing, so our first project was a music video. And one thing with pitching music videos, for example, a lot of labels and artists are used to seeing really flashy music videos with quick cuts. But when it comes to VR, it's pretty difficult to do that same thing. In VR, you don't really, it's best not to have a shot that is less than about 15 seconds, because when the viewer is watching it, they don't have enough time to look around, and then suddenly you're jumping forward. So it can be kind of difficult you have to manage your client's expectations as to how the video is going to look when it's on YouTube, because it's going to be, VR is going to be a little slower, it's going to be a little more drawn out.
Yeah, fast cuts don't work as well.
Yeah.
It's also knowing how you're going to be viewing it. If it's going to be specifically for a headset, or sometimes it's just a 360 video that's going to be on Facebook or YouTube. So you can think about what kind of a project you're making, because a headset does require different, kind of a different medium. Like it wouldn't cut quite as fast because that would make you super dizzy. So you don't want that to happen. So I think that's like a big thing to think about how you're going to display it as well.
Yeah, just to mention what she said, you can use like desktop computers to view it. So we've talked to a lot of people who also develop two different versions, one for the desktop and one for Google Cardboard. So those are just good things to keep in mind as well.
Anything else on the pitch? All right, cool. Oh, here's a few reference images for our project. So our music video, we'll show some stills from it here in a little bit, but the story is if it's a girl drowning in a big lake, and then her sister comes to save her. And so these are a few of our just reference images that we showed the client. And then you'll see how they translated. Cool. So now we're going to talk about pre-production. So our first VR project was a very low budget. So it was our first project, so we were on tight budget, so we were looking to cut corners in any way. So with the locations, one thing that's good about VR is that your camera looks like this, or at least ours did. So no one really knows what you're doing, which means it's really easy to steal locations. And we're from Los Angeles, so we're used to paying a lot of money for locations, so this worked out very much in our favor. And it's, just looks like a bunch of GoPros. It looks like you're filming a skateboarding video or something. Let's talk about casting.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing Tripp did, but we had a shot where she's biking, the actress is biking through the middle of like a small town up there. And normally you would be getting a whole bunch of attention with, a big red or whatever you're shooting with, and definitely works in your favor because no one knows what's going on. You sort of get overlooked, so it's a great way to get good background without any attention being drawn to you as well.
Yeah.
We also switched to recording lights.
The recording lights?
We were like
We did. Did we?
Yeah, no, we turned ours off.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't even know.
Yeah, yeah, that helps too. Yeah,
Most
definitely
stuff,
helps.
yeah.
And the beeps, you can turn the beeping of the GoPros off too, and that tends to help as well.
Yeah, so then casting without, in pre-production, a good, we had a super low budget, so we didn't have the luxury of doing a dry run through the day before, and a VR camera is it's a very different a thing for an actress or an actor, because the director can't be there to coach them. It's like everybody in the whole crew, you push record and everyone jumps away, so the actor or the actress is by themselves. So how we felt with this, just because we didn't have the time to do a run through or practice or preview, we had actors and actresses that we've worked with before, that we had a working relationship with, so that we felt like they trusted us and that we could trust them when we weren't exactly right next to them. But that's the big thing, is because on a shoot day, a huge point is to not stack your day too much for that reason, because the setup time for a shot is everybody's out, everybody sets up, and then you push record and everyone jumps away. So the timing is just a really important thing. Like scheduling your time is huge. It took a lot longer than we expected. Our days ran longer. So that was a huge learning point for us, is to not stack too much going on in one day for that reason.
Yeah, also in an ideal world, we would have a preview cam being able to watch what we're actually shooting, but because we were under time constraints and it was such low budget, we had a preview camera set up, but of course things went wrong, and we didn't have enough time in between takes to even pull the video off and preview it. So you run into issues like that. I guess whatever time you think you're going to take to shoot a shot, like multiply it by the amount of cameras you have, because that's how many problems you're dealing with every time you shoot.
Yeah, so with the GoPro rigs, I think one of the difficult things about shooting with them is being able to, like they were saying, preview your footage. One, kind of like cheap way to do it is you can get an extra GoPro and then attach it to like just below the rig or above the rig, and then you can tie that GoPro. There's a GoPro app that you can get on your phone or on an iPad, so you can at least watch from one view and sort of see how your action is going. But with the app comes a few issues, like we were shooting in like Arrowhead, so there wasn't a lot of connection, so then it was pretty tough to actually pull up everything on the app. So that's definitely is a worthwhile. And I know some of the new cameras that are coming out do have ways of previewing footage, which is going to be great.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about? Should we chat about the bike? Translating to VR? Yeah. Okay, cool. So our music video, so the band that we worked with, they only wanted one thing in the video, and they wanted a shot of a girl running in slow motion. So it sounded pretty easy, but then when we started trying to think about how we were going to shoot this in VR, we started realizing actually that it was going to be a little bit more difficult than we thought. For one, we didn't want to have just the camera sitting there and then the girl run by. We're like, well, that's not going to be very exciting. So we're like, okay, well, we'll have the camera move with the girl. But then if the camera's moving, you have to think about what is moving the camera. If you have it on a dolly, you might see the dolly.
We didn't have the budget for a dolly.
Yeah.
There was no budget.
So our solution was that we ended up having, we had to find motivation for why the camera was following the girl running. So our solution was we had a kid on a bike, and then we had an arm, we attached an arm out and attached the GoPro rig to it, and then we had the kid biking down the road, the girl runs out, and then they're running parallel to one another, and then she ends up hopping on the bike and then biking away. So we get the shot of her running, we're moving with her, and then we end up following her on the bike.
Yeah, and we felt that this also helped with our storytelling, actually, which is a huge part of a music video, is telling a story. So we felt like with the motivation of the camera moving with the girl, it actually created a much more exciting and intriguing music video.
And yeah, it's good to note that these are things you have to think about way beforehand. Like, it's not just setting up shots, but it's how to tell a story with the camera as well. So how the camera moves from one scene to another. So here's a shot. We can talk a little bit about, you want to talk about lighting or how the camera was moving from one to another?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
When you're talking about the storyline, are you ever worried that people are going to miss certain action? Because we're always wondering, can we have something cool so that the second time you watch it or the third time you watch it, there's an action, but then other directors are saying, no, at this stage of the game, people might not be looking around because it's still new and they might miss an action. So
yeah. So one thing that we do to try to make sure that the viewer is catching what we want them to catch is you can always orient, at least for us, we always made sure that the main action was sort of happening in front of you. I know a lot of VR productions, they tend to put things in all directions and you're constantly spinning throughout the whole video. For us, we think it's a little more comfortable. I mean, it kind of depends on your project, but for us, we wanted it to sort of be happening for the most part in front of you. So that I think people from the beginning sort of start to realize that what's behind them is kind of more just peripheral, and that we like the video happening more like in 180 degree sphere, I guess.
We also didn't have the luxury of being able to use sound. A lot of times you can use sound to sort of signal someone to where to look. You hear something out of the right ear, and turns your head to the right to see where the action is. So it being a music video, we didn't have any of that. So the visual storytelling and the visual path that you're taking is one of the most important, because you have to lead their gaze from one shot to another.
Yeah, I can chat about that. So I think another big thing that is sometimes overlooked in VR production is lighting. It can be difficult to set up lighting, because whenever you set up lighting, you're going to have to mask it out, depending on what your shot is. For us, we wanted to make sure that we didn't lose a cinematic look being out in without having any stage lighting, just going off of natural light. So we scattered our location, and we knew our exact time that we had to be shooting, so that the sun would be just low enough in the sky to get a nice backlighting on our actress. And then to help this a little bit, we also picked up some little smoke grenades, which you can use for paintball. And then we had a few folks kind of hiding in the trees right before the shot, lit off the smoke, So smoke gets up there in the air, you get some nice, oh yeah. Yeah, we also taped a few to her bike so that they were constantly emitting out the back, and then that gave us some nice sunrays. Yeah, some nice low budget smoke. So lighting is a big deal because if you just kind of stick it somewhere and don't think about your lighting, it can just come out feeling pretty flat. Yeah.
And actually, in our other scene, there's the girl that's sinking in the water. For our lighting for that one, we blacked out the pool that she was in, and we put a black tarp on top, and then we cut a hole in the tarp so that the sun could just beam down on her. So that's how we lit our actress. Yeah, there's another shot that you can see that she's lit up. So we did some really low budget lighting techniques, but that was fun. Yeah, so that's how we lit that girl that's sinking. We used just a blacked out like home pool. So.
Have any of you guys shot in VR before? Okay, great. Have you guys used any of the GoPro rigs or anything like that?
Yeah, we just
Freedom 360? What about you? Okay. Yeah, so one of the things in production that we found after shooting a couple projects is that you have to be able to deal with a lot of problems. They're by no means perfect, lots of overheating, things like that, especially with underwater shots, which we tried. You run into things like, because the cameras are in a closed environment, you get overheating, you get condensation on lenses, so there's just, the more you can prepare and try and test out your shots beforehand, which if you're on a low budget isn't always something you can do. We definitely recommend as much as you can.
Yeah, and so our underwater shot we used, so with the GoPro rig, we ended up using actually this device right over here, the Abyss, which is an underwater system for the GoPro rig. And then we filmed all of our footage inside of a friend's pool. We used black tarps, and we just sunk black tarps along the side and the floor of the pool, and then we sunk the Abyss underneath the water. And then for the top, we hung a tarp right, just sitting right above the pool, and then cut a hole in the top, so we got a little bit of sunlight coming in, and I think it worked out.
Yeah, and then the texture.
Yeah, okay, and so this image here, you can see it's kind of hard to tell without motion, but there's like a bit of texture that when you watch it, you can like see actual water moving around, and we achieved that with the Abyss. We went out in a little Walmart inflatable boat and kind of went out in the lake a little bit, and we tied the Abyss to a 30-foot chain that we got from Home Depot and just sunk it down in the lake. We got a bunch of different like heights of the water, and then we used that. We then stitched that footage together, and then plopped that in After Effects using Skybox, and we're able to actually use it as a texture, so it didn't look too generated.
Getting the practical texture really helps with making, just kind of giving the film a little bit more of a dynamic look instead of it looking quite so generated and plastic looking. So we really feel like the texture helps, like getting practical textures that you can overlay on top really, really helps to tell a better story.
Then a quick tip when you're shooting VR, and I think this goes with just about any VR camera, is that you always want to make sure that your main action, that you want to have the camera lens, a lens focused directly at the action. So if I was going to film this gentleman right here, I wouldn't want there to be a big line. I wouldn't want him to be in between both of these cameras. I'd want to make sure that one of them was facing him head on, so that when you stitch all the footage together, he doesn't appear in the middle of two cameras, and whenever I'm looking at him, I see him kind of like spliced in half. So all the different arrays, all the different camera arrays have a different way of arranging the GoPros, but you always want to make sure that the lens is focusing on your crucial action.
And you're always going to get crossover too, but you just want to try and do the best you can to get like your main action in one shot where you don't have as much stitch lines going through everything.
And if you are going to work off of a GoPro rig, Freedom 360, you can just Google GoPro settings for VR, because you always have to have the right settings on the camera. and they're very specific to what's going to look good. So if you just Google like best settings for VR, there's a blog post on Freedom 360, and they tell you all about the different GoPros and all about the different frame rates, and you can make sure that everything's going to be set for you.
I think a huge thing before doing any kind of project, especially a low budget one because you don't have any extra time, is to do as much research as possible. Because even with the Abyss, there's different settings that you have to set up, even from just like shooting on a normal 360, like the 360 rig. So it's just researching and like figuring out the exact settings, because otherwise when you get into post, it's going to be the biggest headache, or it's not even going to work. Yes.
Have you found, how close have you found it's not disturbing to have your main actor to the focal camera using the headset?
So it's different for different cameras. So with our rig, the 6-camera one, I felt like people were able to get a lot closer than maybe like a 16-camera rig that has more depth and more perspective to it. It was about, would you say, 3 feet for us? That was about as close as anybody ever got to.
Yeah, 2.5.
But like the bike shot, he can pull that up. It was pretty close to her face, and it doesn't have too much distortion to it. So I think it just depends on the rig you're using and testing out how close people can get.
As far as the user experience, though, like with the Gear VR on, you know,
Yeah.
how close? I don't know if
So
you
I
guys
feel
played
like
with
this
the
rig was
raisin.
right here, but it still gave like she didn't look too like big
Yeah,
and
yeah,
scary
yeah,
in front of your face.
We've definitely seen some where, yeah, people end up becoming like giants, and you get that distortion because the lens is, you're getting too close to it. I think that was about 3 feet away for
Yeah,
that
it
shot.
can have the feeling if they get too close, instead of it feeling intimate, it feels like you're really small and they're like looking down on you or something. It has a strange feeling when they get really close.
Yeah, we were good with 3 feet.
Yeah, I think this was about 3 feet, and it felt like it was a pretty good distance. And we tried, and one important thing when you're shooting VR, especially with the GoPro rigs, when you're not able to monitor too much of what you're shooting, it helps to definitely get plenty of takes, because like I was showing you earlier with facing the lens in the right direction, you never really know. Like for us, we had the camera mounted out on this thing, and she was biking around and it was moving a little bit. So we shot this, at least, I don't know what, 10 or 11 times or something, just to make sure that when we got into stitching, we weren't going to find that we had a big line going through her, or that it felt too high or too low. One tip with shooting actors and actresses with VR cameras, I think it helps a lot if the camera is around eye level, so that you're level with your actor or actress. Of course, you can break that rule depending on what kind of feeling you're going for. But with empathizing with your actor or actress, I think eye level tends to work pretty well. Yeah, we have anything else in production?
I know.
I'm going to just give this to you for a second.
So we'll talk a little bit about post now. You can even pull that shot back up. We can talk about the stitching and how that camera's up there. So in this scene, if you want to rotate it around a little, the camera is about 3 feet out in front of her, sort of hovering over the bike. So one of the things we ran into with this shot is you have to mount that camera somehow. We had some clamps onto the bike coming out this far.
Sort of barely see it in here.
Yeah, so lots of roto work. The arm that came out from the bike up to here. It actually crossed about 3 cameras in the front, which we didn't think was going to happen. So you're going in and rotoscoping 3 cameras for that entire scene, and it's not a fun process.
Yeah, this is where Skybox came very much in handy. So Skybox is a plugin for After Effects for editing and animating and rotoing VR footage. So that's what really enabled us to actually make the shot work. We didn't want you to be able to see this pole obviously coming out. We wanted it to feel pretty seamless, and like the camera was just kind of floating out in front of her. So Skybox enabled us to take this shot into After Effects and then roto out the rig.
Once you have it stitched, you can split up the frames into like flat planes. So it's much easier to work on when you're rotoscoping instead of having to work in the equal rectangular warped footage.
Like better than the color software.
Yeah, and especially if you're adding in effects, just being able to see it in broken up into each camera. And so you have a viewpoint for each camera and can see, then it sort of compiles it into the equal rectangular afterwards.
So AutoPano,
Yeah, well,
yeah, I can.
post.
Yeah, so AutoPano is like for stitching the software. So that would be like your first step would be to take the 6 cameras and stitch them in a software like AutoPano, or there's Video Stitch as well. And then in the stitching software, what that enables you to do is synchronize your 6 cameras so that they're all running at the same time. It's just the same as if you're shooting video and audio. You want them to line up, and that's how you want the 6 cameras to line up perfectly. And the stitching software enables you to do that. The other thing that you'll do in the stitching software is equalize the color, because what tends to happen, especially with GoPros, is that your camera that's pointed up to the sky will get it'll be either a little bit brighter, or it'll adjust and get a little bit darker. And so all your cameras are pointed in different directions, capturing different light sources, so they're going to look a little bit different when you stitch them all together. But the stitching software enables you to equalize the color throughout, so that you get a nice even tone throughout your composition. It also enables you to feather the edges. A lot of times you'll watch VR projects and you'll see these harsh lines that go through the project, but it enables you to blur them and work them together.
Yeah, we tried Video Stitch and we tried color, and we felt like color just worked better for us. We were able to, it had a better feature of feathering the edges. It helped us a lot more than we felt like Video Stitch did.
Going back to the water shot too, one of the things that we came into was because when you shoot in certain underwater rigs, you're capturing, we shot in a higher frame rate, so we had less resolution, so there was less overlap when you go into stitching. Also being underwater, when you're stitching, you need control points, like a reference point where 2 frames overlap for it to know where it is, which camera's in what position. Which underwater you don't have many control points at all. So we ended up having to use a couple other tools, PT GUI, a few things that help you add control points and get a little bit more in depth with the stitching process.
Yeah, and so this shot, our underwater shot, like I was saying, we shot in a pool with blacked out surroundings, and then we were able to, in post, take this footage, trace out our actress, and then bring her into an After Effects composition where we were able to actually build the environment. And we did all of that in Skybox, and it enabled us to actually build her environment in 360. I'm not sure how familiar y'all are with working in After Effects, but it essentially takes the After Effects workflow and just enables you to work in 360, which is fantastic. So for this shot, like I was saying, this is a mixture of underwater footage, and then it used to be where if you looked up, you'd see our inflatable boat appear somewhere with the chain coming down, but we were able to erase all of that and replace it with water. And then we generated these bubbles in a plugin called Trap Code, which enables you to do 3D particles inside of After Effects.